So I've decided to start doing something that I was previously doing in my last job, but instead of do it for Stokastia. So what I'm going to try to do every day, do a really short video that shows what I did that day, both for my own records and to make it easier to communicate with anybody that's interested. So I actually have a fair bit of outstanding work to commit for today, so I won't go through everything that I worked on today. I'll show you what I've done that has been committed. So let's just go through each of these one at a time. Um, this bit is fairly insignificant. It's just ignoring this log.txt. So what that is let me just clear this. So normally, if I run the program, I'm gonna have to zoom this out just a sec. So this is using the Civilized AI data for testing. Um, and so it spits out this report with the various statements, and normally it prints that. However, um, I needed to automate a process where I wanted to make sure that, let me just show this. I'll go into something like this. So I feel like there's a bit of a Stack Overflow here in terms of explanation, but these notes can come from previous numbers for when this was processed previously by an earlier application or by Excel or whatever it was. And so what I'm doing is I'm making sure that the the balance of total assets, for example, at the point that this event is processed is the same, or where it's not the same, that there's a reasonable explanation. So what I had been doing previously was I would look at this and I would check, oh, what is the total assets and does it match? And that obviously is a manual process. So that's annoying and time consuming. So what I did was instead of just printing it out, so I'll just come in here. So there was this render call. I basically made another version of render, which is log. And inside log, it just takes the same output and saves it to log.txt. And then once I've got this file, then I was using this little scrap application, which I'm going to throw away again later. But basically, what scrap does, I'll just run it. It checks the latest thing and checks that all the numbers that were present show up in the log file. And if they don't, then there's some issue. So in this case, everything's happy, so it's printing true. Otherwise, it would print the particular key of the value that didn't match. So that's what that's about. I didn't want it to be committed, but the log.txt file gets updated every time start.py runs, which is part of this node 1 process. So that's the first commit. Super easy, but there's context behind it. So the next one was simplifying some data. So this long string was making the statements not have enough space. So I just removed the purchase of and just put the name of the thing, and made that consistent between the two cards. So we had previously bought two GPUs. One of them, Civilizer, had sold to Zach. But yeah, anyway, so that's that commit. Then it's just extracting a function and writing some tests. So this is a really simple function. Basically what it does is, before I explain that, I have to talk about blocks. So let me just talk about that. Where was this function? So this function is in functions block remove lines. Okay, so another thing. So the directory structure is such that the source code is split up into classes and functions. I've tried to keep it that classes are as close to structs as possible, but there's some syntactic sugar there to do cool things. But wherever possible, I try to make functions the place where things are actually happening, and classes are the place where things are stored in some particular form. So in functions, the directory structure is such that whatever the name is here is the type of the input to the function. So everything that's in the dict directory should be accepting a dict as an input. So in this case, we're interested in something that's accepting a block as an input. So we go into block, and it takes that block, and then it'll remove any lines that contain 0.00. So you can see here there are two tests, and in this particular test, it has 0 lines, and this one doesn't. But in this one, it has a line that is 0.00. Now, a block is basically a bit of code that ends up stacking lines and guarantees that they are of uniform width. And blocks have other properties, and blocks are specified in the hack library, which is something that I've written earlier. It's just a collection of tools that I've written. So let's just have a peek at block. So blocks have a width, a height, and lines, and you can convert them to a string, or you can pull out a particular line, and they've got a function to tell whether or not two blocks are equivalent. So yeah, and these tests are non-compliant, so I apologize for that, but this is doing what it needs to do. Okay, so that's what that function is. We needed that because in the statements here, well, this one we wanted to keep because it's a high-level one, but if you had something where the item here was 0, there's no point showing it. So if it was 0, it would be removed, and that's the reason we have this function. It'll remove that line from the block. So that's that, and that's what was committed there. And then what's the next one? So there's some more data work. So this is like we had a fairly verbose specification of events, and once I had reconciled the numbers, which I've now done using the stuff that I talked about earlier, I was able to simplify each of these down to a much more concise representation, which we've got here. And I've also done something else which has not been committed yet, which makes it even more concise, but we'll come back to that later when it actually gets committed. So this is just the data for Civilized AI for that particular month, 2019 August. Okay, cool. So let's go back to the next one. So this is the same, and in here we might see the additional work I've done to make it slightly more concise. So you can see this had all the notes here. I reconciled that, and so all of that simplified to this. And what's new here is that I've replaced the longer explicit date form here with this, which is basically saying day 4 of the month M, where the month M is specified up here. And the month M so this is another class I've created. Basically, it's a type of period which has a start and an end. So that's basically what a start and end. Sorry, what a period is. It's some object that has a start and an end date. And in this case, the month has an index and a year and a number and a name. And yeah, it's all the stuff that you expect a month should have. That's what it has. And yeah, so this is specifying the month. So the year is 2019. The month number is 9. So everything here is referring to the same thing. So it just saves having to write that over and over and over again. Probably laboring this point a little bit. So let's move on to the next thing. I'm not sure why this has outstanding changes. Let's see. Oh yeah, so that date field was redundant. That hasn't been committed yet, but that'll get committed later. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. So then we had this very simple function, basically to make the code more robust. This is a little bit of defensive programming. it just makes sure that there is at least an empty dict associated with each of these keys, and this is each of the kinds of statements that we're expecting to produce. So this guarantee statement keys exist. That occurs twice. No, it doesn't occur once now because I've made a common function. But basically, you have the input object, and it just makes sure that those keys exist. And if they don't, then it'll create an empty dict. And if they do, the values pop through. So you can see here there is an existing value for cash flow. In the expectation, it's still there. The same thing for retained earnings. And when that test goes through, it proves that that data hasn't been blown away. So that is that one. So let's see, what have we got to go? Finally, a bit more data cleaning. So same little thing that happened before. The month is being specified here and being used throughout. This all this stuff to do with notes, that's been reconciled manually, well, semi-automatically. It's been checked using that tool that I was referring to earlier, and so that all that red stuff gets reduced down to this, and that is the end of my commits for today. I couldn't commit more because I had code that was non-compliant with respect to tests. So I will continue this process tomorrow. But you can see that what's outstanding is mostly data cleaning work, where this stuff has been reconciled. I'm not sure about this launch service stuff. I think what's happened is, oh yeah, there was another thing that happened. So previously with equipment depreciation, so previously we had this depreciation worked by passing in an amount in Australian dollars, but what I've replaced that with is the original purchase amount and the depreciation period. And what that means is that we get the proper value that's being depreciated rather than an approximation, and that is being represented down here as an Australian dollar form, which is, if we just drill into that, that's a kind of rate, which is specified in the hack library that I wrote. The rate is basically a kind of number type that I've specified that is effectively a rational, and yeah, so that has various advantages for me, and yeah, so we've got that, and then you can see that there's a whole lot of depreciation revision here, because once I made that change, all this stuff had to be re-specified. Instead of being a fixed value in Australian dollars, it became that pair of original value and depreciation period. So we got a whole lot of that. This is some function decomposition that was happening before, so it was in another function. It's been pulled out, and we've got some tests there, and it's just waiting to be committed when it's ready. Yeah, I guess the rest of it will come to in another day. And that's the update for today. Oh, and I should mention that this is like the first day back for me for a long time. Just for context, if you're not familiar, I had been living with my grandmother, which was a very precious time for us. It was an opportunity for me to shift from Canberra, but it was also a time to spend time with her, as she was quite elderly. But at the end of last year, she sadly passed away, and then the result of that is that we can no longer live with her in her house. So I've had to deal with all of that and empty the house and find a new place to live. And so I'm now in a position again where I'm able to do some work. And yeah, so it's been a while. But with this test routine that I run, I added some additional code here, which estimates the completion time. And because of that long period of about a month and a half off, this has skyrocketed from July 2024 to December 2024. Um, I'm not sure if I should reset the data or I should just leave it. It should come down quite radically as I start to work more. This little delta value means the increment step of the previous expectation to the new expectation. So since the last time that the test ran, when it reassessed the expected end date, it added it at 2 hours and 24 minutes. So ideally we want that to go down to be a negative value, not a positive one, especially that such a large thing. Anyway, this update has been far too long, so I will stop at this point, upload it, and make it available to Yasser or James or whoever is curious about what I've been doing today. Thank you for your attention.